Hello and welcome. It is Thursday again. Tonight we are bang on time. So, for the last week we have been discussing a lot of issues: global terrorism, terrorism in Africa. We also, for the two programs in a row, we were discussing Mali and the fiasco of this coup, what is going on here. So, but this time, we are going to discuss about something which probably is the cause of the problem, which people do not understand. And this is constitution. As you know, many African leaders, they changed their constitutions or the national's constitution to suit their purpose. But of course, I'm not an expert. David Otto from Steppedin, Step Out, or in short we call CISO, is going to be your host as always. And I don't want to waste so much time. David, you are on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Otieno. We want to once more appreciate Africans in London television for always giving us this platform to have these brainstorming exercises regarding issues of terrorism, issues of security in Africa. And that is why we have termed this each Thursday program, Security Update from Africa. As Mr. Joseph has said, last week we have been talking for the past weeks, actually, about the situations in Mali, the situation in Burkina Faso, and the coup and which has happened. And specifically, we thought let's go down to the wire and discuss issues of the Constitution. So we really want to appreciate our guests for always following up on these programs and sending their very thoughtful questions to our panelists, to our experts that we bring here every week. And we also appreciate them for sending their questions on issues of the Constitution. So today, I'm grateful to have a wonderful specialist with me, Dr. Lamin Daffeh, who is a constitutional expert. He's also a lecturer, a PhD lecturer at the university here in the UK, Birmingham University. I think he has also been one of those individuals that is quite vast with his knowledge, especially after acquiring his anti-terrorism specialist certification. So Dr. Lamin and I would go into this discussion about what it means to have a country's constitution, but more importantly, what is it that happens when a state is set to commit what we call a constitutional coup, as opposed to when people talk about a military coup. So we would have this conversation and discuss, perhaps go down to the wire and talk about the somewhat Western origin of the Constitution by a famous constitutionalist, Albert Daffeh, and understand what Daffeh really meant, when he talked about the supremacy of the Constitution, the supremacy of Parliament, who actually has the power to change a constitution, and the implications of that, especially in the continent of Africa, as we would discuss with Dr. Lamin. I think it's important much more to have this conversation again, because we've seen situations that are ongoing in countries like Cameroon, for example, in Cote d'Ivoire. We've seen other countries where, as Mr. Joseph said in the earlier introduction, they've decided to change the constitution. So we would discuss that and see what it means, and if these constitutions are changed legally, or these are political decisions. So welcome, Dr. Lamin, to Africa Security Update. It's a pleasure to have you on this program, Dr. Lamin.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. It's always brilliant to have conversation with you, and especially on such a very important matter as constitution.
Okay,
thank
you.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamin, for your time. I think it's more important for me to let's start with the basics, so that our viewers can really understand, this aspect of the Constitution. How does it come about, and who can change the Constitution and who cannot change the Constitution, and what are the circumstances under which a constitution can be changed? Let's look at the cases of Africa here, Dr. Lamin. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I think obviously when you look at the basic concept of constitution, is that it could be described as a set of rules that distribute and regulate powers. Okay, so it looks at the state powers, how those powers are regulated, and then how they are distributed. So what it does is it regulates the majority of state institutions, so that when government are implementing their constitution, or how they treat their citizens, are in line with constitution. So it looks at the relationship between the states and individuals. So, and then the essence of that is to create a limitation and boundaries on state powers. So to what extent can a state have these powers and impose onto its citizens? So the Constitution is basically there to be able to create that boundaries and say to the states, this is where you can go and this is where you can't go. So it creates that boundary on state powers. It also outlines the duties of people. So citizens, these are your duties. This is how you should live your life in terms of the rule of law. Okay, so this is really absolutely imperative in terms of how citizens and states coexist. Okay, so it's telling the government this is what you can do, to the extent of which you can go up to this stage and stop. And then it also imposes duties on citizens, in terms of their state powers. To the extent of which you
yes, go ahead, Dr. Lamin. I know there is an interruption there from the technical decks, but just go ahead. But one thing which I wanted to get to talk to you about, which I think is quite important, is about the issue of whether it is the people that should be the ultimate controller of the constitution, or it is the members of parliament. I know we often hear of the government in parliament. We often hear of the queen in parliament. In the case of Africa, where people are rioting that a constitution has been changed, isn't that?
I think we get
in parliament. We often hear of the queen in parliament. Yes, I know that we're getting some hitches, from the side. I don't know if Mr. Joseph can do anything about
gentlemen,
that.
can we, David, can you actually log off and come back again? Because
from the side, I don't know if Mr. Joseph can do anything about
gentlemen,
that. Yes, let me log off and log in again.
Yeah,
Let me log off and log in
we're
again.
experiencing some problems here.
Yeah, I didn't get that
Let me
at all.
see.
Yeah.
Is that okay now, Mr. Joseph?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Let me just explain to. So, viewers, we have to apologize about this. I know the technology sometimes plays up, but I think we have sorted out the problem. We can go back as normal now. David can go back and ask the question from afresh. Let us try again. Hi, David.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Lamin. Sorry for that. That hitch there. I don't know if he's still there, but I hope he's not. As I was saying, I wanted to get to you because you were talking about these, the origin and everything about the constitution. But who is more powerful? Because we've seen in Africa where people go on the streets and request for the executive to resign. You and I know that in a democratic system, it is the people that elect members of parliament who, in turn, are the people who make the laws. And the laws constitute part of the constitution. Now, when the people go on the streets and request for the executive, which is supposed to be one arm of the government, including the president, to resign, is this something which the constitution looks into and requests for?
Yes, I think, that aspect of constitutional change or government changes is very complicated. Oh, sorry, we're getting the interference again.
Yeah, so let me log off again. Let me just log off and see if I can log in. Mr. Joseph, let me just log off and see if I can log in. Maybe it's coming from my side.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Mr. Joseph?
It is. It's okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Let Dr. Lamin go ahead.
Yeah. So what I want to say about that is, in essence, in terms of the constitutional principle, we obviously need to understand that both people and government are bound by constitutional provisions. So we are all equal in terms of law and how the constitutional principles impose that equality on us. So now, what the constitution of many countries will highlight is that there is an election. Okay, so there is an election system. So it will say within that constitution, it will stipulate that every 5 years there should be an election. So now, when people get fed up with the government to the extent that they demand the government to resign, and then it becomes so popular, the concept becomes popular, that people go on the street and start rioting and create an atmosphere that is obviously risk to security of the country. Then in those situations, what we've seen it in during the Arab Spring and in few African countries, then the government is forced to resign. Now, what happened in that situation is that the constitutional principles or the mandates that was given to the head of state is set aside for people power to come into being. Okay, so this is the trouble. So now, when obviously then the president will have to make a decision: do I want my country to descend into chaos, into civil war or anarchy, or should I just resign? And in that place, then there will be a lot of pressure on the head of state. So they will say, listen to the people. Okay. So the international community will come in, and then most likely the military will come in as well. And then they will put pressure on the head of state to resign. So if then the head of state resign in that situation, in that condition, without going through the votes, then that means that obviously the constitution will be suspended at that stage, because the constitutional mandate is that, we go for elections to change our leaders. So any situation that change the leadership, the mandate of the leader, whether they've been there for only 3 years when they should serve 5 years, then obviously then that becomes unconstitutional, because it's an unconstitutional change. But those changes were exacerbated by people's will. So it was the popular demand. So now what they have to do is then they have to balance between national security issues and for the constitution to prevail.
So does that mean, from that explanation, Dr. Lamin, that of course we know that there is no governance without the people's consent. Now, does that
Yes.
mean that the people are inadvertently more powerful than the constitution in that scenario? And do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. That's what I always say to people, that the power of the people is exceeded the power of any government, because ultimately the people will vote the president in, and then they could take that president out. However, what I don't want to say is that the power of the people superseded the power of the constitution, because the constitution should supersede everything. It should be the ultimate law of the land. So people should respect the constitution. So now if there is an issue where people were so fed up with the head of state, they want him out, and then they went on the street and then protest, at that point, that's what I'm saying, at that point the constitutional principles are set aside. However, in a democratic society, it is better. In a democratic society, it is better for the people to decide through the ballot box who they want to govern.
Let me come to you before I get to Mr. Joseph, because he's got a very good question to ask, perhaps. Now, in light of that, what you've explained, and you said that people should respect the Constitution. Of course, this is some kind of a contract between once you elect your executive or you elect your parliamentarians, you've got to respect the laws that come from that.
Yeah.
You and I know very well that there is a difference between justice and legality.
Yes.
And the principles of justice are very, much more important than the principles of legality. Because, for example, slave trade or slavery was once a legal trade.
Yeah.
So was, so many other things, which that were once legal, but they were not just.
No.
So at what point do you balance justice with legality? Because in most of the coup d'etats that we've seen, in most of the conflicts that we've seen in Africa, the reason why people go on the streets is not because of legality, it's because of justice. And what the people are saying is, we want justice. And
Yes.
the government is saying, we want you to respect the law. I mean, what happens there, Dr. Lamin?
Yes. So I think this is where the conflict arise between, like you said, between the legality and justice. And obviously, when people are disfranchised, about their government, they're not getting what the government promised them. There's poverty, there's injustice, there's no rule of law, and there's dictatorship. And then obviously the results of that is for them to take the laws into their own hands. That's why we have that phrase, you taking the laws into your own hands. Okay? So rather than wait until the president term of office ended, people are saying, you know what, we're fed up now, we're going on the street and we want this person out. because we elected him. But then, like I said before, the ultimate sources of legal authorities lies on the Constitution. So if we change the government in any way, whether through people's powers on the street or through military coup, then that notion become unconstitutional. Okay, there might be justification for that, like we've seen. You living in a place where your fundamental human rights are not being respected, and therefore you want the military, you want the government to go. But then this is what they try to stop. This is what the international communities and governments are saying. Look, if you want to change the government, do it through the ballot box, because it is the constitutional method of changing the government.
Mm.
So we can understand that obviously, yes, people want government to change. However, in a democratic society and in a more secure way, is for government to change through the ballot box. Most people will not agree on this because obviously, you know, you could see examples where, I know we will touch on this, but you know, a president will sit in most African countries for 30 years, and there is no way they can be changed or he can be changed through a ballot box. So therefore, the vulnerability of civil unrest or a military coup is so high that the only way to take them out is through those two methods. Because constitutional method doesn't work, and people feel that way, that it doesn't work. So therefore, we have to go on the street. But the ultimate legal authority lies on the Constitution, and that says that there is a presidential term limit, or there might not be in some certain jurisdictions. However, the Constitution empower every country or every citizen to vote, either in every 5 years or in every 3 years, to change your leaders, and that is the legal method of doing it, of changing the government.
Yes, Mr. Joseph, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Lamin. And you see, I am not a diplomat person or I'm not an academic person, but I have taken a route of reading and finding out what is the cause of all these problems.
Yes.
Now, one thing that I will come to the question.
Okay.
What I have found is that the Constitution is not understood by the common man.
No.
And I believe that the Constitution is there to help the people that are being governed. And in fact, they have got more power, if you look into it, than the president.
Yes.
But many presidents in Africa, especially in Africa, they assume absolute power. So does that mean that the Constitution is deliberately not explained to the common man? Because if the common man or the common woman knew that they have got absolute power to remove the president or just to change the government anytime, these military coups wouldn't even be there. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I think this is one of the fundamental issues that we have in Africa, because when you have authoritarian governments where the government controls so much powers, the executive, all powers are vested in the executive, and the common people, like you said, our friends and families who are in the village and they don't have any formal education. And the Constitution is written in English language. And there is no one there who can interpret that Constitution to them in their own languages. So therefore, if you go into, I know David and I are going to discuss this. Hopefully, he's going to ask me one of these questions about, how the constitution is changed and how it comes into being. That you allow those people to decide on a constitutional principle that they don't understand. For example, like you touch on it, the presidential term limit. So a head of state could say, okay, the constitution gave me the mandate, 2 terms. So my first term in the office, and then I am eligible for re-elections, and then my second term in the office. And then that's it. Just like in America, yeah, the system. And then the head of state decide, you know what? No, the people want me to stay. So I'm going to increase my term limit, and then I'm going to omit, I'm going to repeal that constitutional principle that only give me to stay in power for 2 terms, and then put it indefinite. So as long as I win the elections, I can remain as a president.
Mm.
So we've seen this happening in lots of African countries. And then perhaps they might even do it cleverly by changing the constitution through referendum and said, you know what, we're going to now allow people to decide whether I should stay forever, like they commonly say, president for life. Okay? So they will go with the referendum, which basically what they're trying to do is to tell people, look, I'm doing this a legal way. So I'm asking people their opinion whether I should stay as a president for as long as I can. Okay? So then they will allow people to go into referendum. But then the concept of that referendum wouldn't be explained to them. They wouldn't understand that. What they will do is, if you let the president to stay, he will provide you with water, he will provide you with electricity, he will provide you with hospital, he will provide you with schools.
Mm.
So then people who don't understand the principle behind that referendum will vote for him, naturally. You know,
Yeah.
because what they're saying is, if you allow me to stay for another 10 years, then I'll bring these services to you. And that's what Obama said, that if you as a head of state could not do, you know, the development within 10 years, there is no way you could do that in the next 30 years.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point you're making, Dr. Lamin. And thanks, Mr. Joseph, for that very powerful question. Now, on the same vein, in the same manner of conversation,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you could explain to the audience what actually goes on behind the scenes when it comes to changing the constitution. I mean, how does it work, and how do governments go about it in such a way that it suits them, as you explained,
Yeah.
in the sense of, so for example, a president clearly has 2 terms in office, and then he wants the third term.
Yeah.
You know, what I mean. Is he allowed to change the constitution? Is the parliament allowed to change the constitution? I mean, reference, to A.V. Dice's principles.
Yes. So basically, what Professor Dicey said, that parliaments are not bound by their predecessors, and parliaments are not bound by the future parliaments. Okay,
Right.
so that means that if, for example, you are the head of state, and you serve your 10 years, and then you went through democratic process, and then you lost the election, or you lose the elections, and then the new president comes in, then that president is not bound by your parliament. So basically what will happen is they could go and change the constitution and amend the constitution. Okay, so that process is obviously, the amendment, so they can look at, like, for example, let's look at the presidential term limit. You put 10 years term limit, and I come in and I said, you know what, no, I'm going to get rid of that 10 years term limit. There is no term limit for president. Or the age of which one can be qualified as a president, you set yours to 30 years. And I said, no, that's too much. So I bring it down to 25 years to suit me. Okay? Or you set yours to a qualification, which is a university degree. And I know that I don't have a university degree. So therefore, I just change it to high school certificate. So head of states they do these things. These things do happen in countries where certain provisions of the constitutions will be changed to suit the executive. Now, obviously, we know that constitutional change lies with Parliament, because Parliament is supreme. That's what we said. Parliament is supreme. So now, if you control the majority of seats in Parliament, those amendments are easily done, because all you need is for your MPs to support your ideas, and then it will go through Parliament.
Right.
Okay. So they will vote for it, and this is what happens even in countries like in the UK. We've seen it with Brexit. So they will vote for their party, these provisions to go through. So that very concept that the Parliament can change is not bound by its predecessor, then that is giving this new government chance to repeal the laws that they think are not in their favor.
Yes, but Dr. Lamin, let me come there, because you've made some very good points. Now, the purpose of this leeway that Professor Dicey spoke about, that no parliament can be bound by its predecessors, and no current parliament can bound its future parliament.
Yeah.
Now, the purpose of this particular principle was to avoid bad laws from being enacted. So, for example, we know about slavery laws of slavery, and all those other laws which were quite bad laws.
Yeah.
So now is it fair to say that the Constitution is now subject to abuse, other than what it was intended for, in terms of that principle?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I said is that when you look at constitutional law itself, it is a kind of a mixture of politics and law. So you have the legal principles there, but you also have politics. So politics will always play within that spectrum of constitutionality, and what will happen is head of states will always make sure that they do anything that is in their interest, that is risk, in terms of their presidency or their government. But obviously, all constitution, whether codified or uncodified, or whether written or unwritten, identify common features such as, you have your legislature, executive, judiciary. Those three principles, doctrines of separation of powers. Yeah.
Yeah, but talking about those three principles, Dr. Lamin, because I think you've mentioned that. So I think I had a question for that, so you can answer that as well while you're talking about it.
Yeah.
You've got the doctrine of the separation of powers, which demands that the executive, which of course is the president and his ministers and all that, are separated from the legislature, which is the law, or the courts. From legislature and the judiciary.
Yes.
Now, of course, how do you see the role of politics in that? In the fact that this is just a principle, it doesn't apply in practice. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, that principle is to create checks and balance. So there should be checks and balances, between the three, organs of government. But now, the risk is that when you have a weak institutions such as the judiciary, where the president controls the Supreme Court. The president will select the Supreme Court judge, the president of the Supreme Court, and all the judges that sit in the Supreme Court. If those people are controlled by the president, then that creates a weak judiciary. So, in essence, the president will get away with bad laws, enacting bad laws, because he knows that, or she knows that, the judiciary will be on their side. So that's why we need strong institutions that will say to the executive, no, what you're doing is illegal. You are acting illegally beyond your powers, because there is a checks and balance. There is a separation of powers. And our courts are not going to be controlled by the executive. So this is absolutely fundamental. And it will obviously create instability if governments allow their institutions to be weak to the extent that the government, the executive can control the judiciary. So then if you go to Supreme Court, all the Supreme Court judges and the president will be obviously accountable to the president. They should be completely independent. They shouldn't be accountable to the executive. And that's the risk, of the concept of separation of powers.
And in light of that, we've seen, especially in the situation of Mali, we've seen that in Ivory Coast. We've seen that in many other countries in Africa, where there is an executive, and then that executive uses, in this case, the military, to impose, its, somehow to, as its police, for constitutional change, where people are protesting. But now what we constantly see, in some countries like we've seen in Mali, the same military that is being used to oppress the people is the same military that is used to launch a constitutional or a military coup against the president. I mean, how do we see that? Is it that we need to have, instead of 3 separation of powers, we should have 4? Because in the case of Mali, the military has become some kind of an institution that should be in par with the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. I mean, do you agree, or am I just dreaming here?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously the role of the military should be completely separate. When we look at the role of military, especially from the, from our concept, from African perspective, it's not just there to protect the territorial integrity of the states, but the military in Africa can also interfere within the internal affairs or internal political affairs of the states. So the role of military kind of shift from being, protecting the territorial integrity of the country against, external aggression, to, standing up and tell the president, look, we are fed up with you, you need to go. Or the people are fed up with you, therefore you need to go. Okay? So that shouldn't be the role of the military. And obviously now we're going into discussing about, the intervention, the military intervention known as the coup d'etat in Africa, and how that is detrimental to constitutional rule. It is. Because what we don't want is for military to change the government through the battle the barrel of the gun. Like I said previously, governments should be changed through elections. So now when you come up with a scenario where this is completely impossible, either the president refused to go and there's rampant corruption, the nepotism, the human rights violations, the enforced disappearance, the loads of violations, and the president controlled the government, and there's no way out except military intervention. So that is what set a very dangerous precedent for Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because when the military comes in, they suspend the constitution. All right, so the constitution is suspended, and then they rule by decrees. So now,
Right.
what you should understand is that no military officers will just get up and organize a coup. Okay, this is planned. They think about it because they know the risk. Because if you are a senior military officer and you've gone through all your training, all your military training, you understand that an assault on the constitution is treason. Okay?
Punishable by death.
Punishable by death in countries that have death penalties. If you failed in your coup attempt, you could die. Okay? You'll be executed because it's treason. So therefore, they will ensure that they are successful. This could go ahead and we get our objectives right. Because if not, you either spend the rest of your life in jail or you'll be taken to a firing squad. Okay?
Mm.
So it's a serious thing for military to do. Now, in the case of Mali, and what we're seeing recently is that military is coming in because of civilians uprise. Okay, so people go out and demand the government to resign, and then it prolonged, it created a lot of uncertainties for security and for law to prevail. So therefore the military will come in and say, you need to listen to the people because the people want you out. So then the military will come. Now the problem is that when the military comes in, they don't stay in for a month or 2 months and supervise a transitional government. Okay, so for example, let's look at in 1994, July 22nd, 1994, when the coup happens in Gambia, you had a junior military officers, lieutenants who took over the country. The leader was only 29 years old. Okay, so they knew that the risk they are taking is treason. So, but when they came into power, they came up with this concept of soldiers with difference. So soldiers with a difference. So which means that we just came to change the government and we will go back to the barracks. That is fallacy. Okay, that doesn't happen in most scenarios. So as soon as they come in, what they're trying to do is to entrench themselves into power. So the constitution is suspended. So your civil and political rights are completely suspended. You cannot take part in voting or you cannot be voted for. They will suspend all the political activities. So there's no opposition leader. Okay, it's just the military council. So this is what set a serious civil unrest, because when people are not allowed to enjoy their human rights, their freedom of movement, their freedom of expression, the military or the junta control the radio station, they impose curfew when you can go out, when you can come home. You're not allowed to get involved in your civil and political rights. Then what the international communities and people are trying to say is that we need a quick transition back to democracy. So this doesn't happen in many cases because what the military's objective is to stay in power.
Okay, so hold it there, Dr. Lamin. The military's objective is to stay in power.
Yeah.
I mean, let me remove your legal hat a little bit and come back to your anti-terrorism specialist hat.
Yeah.
You and I know that the military is not trained to engage in civil administration.
No.
The military is exclusively trained as, a protector of territorial integrity, especially against an external enemy. The military is not trained to confront, internal threats. They are much more equipped towards confronting external enemies. Now, when the military, organizes a coup, like we've seen in Mali and other countries, the expectation is that they don't have the ability to take control, because there's one thing with organizing a coup, there's one thing with taking control of the country.
Yeah.
Now, how does it work? Is it that they bring in, other civil administration people around them, or they try to do things themselves? And is that one of the reasons why they always ask for more time?
Yeah.
Like in the case of Mali, where they're saying, give us 3 years. Is it because they want to figure out what to do? Go ahead, Dr. Lamin.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is, because obviously, like you said, myself, I was in the British Army for 8 years, and I have never been taught, civil administration or how to run a government. That's not my job. My job is to protect the nation, to be trained as a soldier, in weapons to protect the country. That is your job, Obviously, as senior officers, you have some lots of management skills and all that. But we military are not politicians. They are not politicians, and we shouldn't confuse them with that. But in answering your question, I think what you have said is absolutely right. So what they will do normally is that they will come into power with the concept that, as a military officer, when you take over the government and you successful, what else for you to do, because you can't go back to barracks. We've never seen that happen. Okay, you either resign as a soldier and become a politician, or they might send you to international appointment as a diplomat. Okay, so usually what will happen is that, I think in the past 20 years, things have changed. We've seen a shift of military administration, where instead of the entire government become, soldiers in uniform, they will now blend it with civilians. So, but all the strategic positions will be held by the military. So the head of state will be the military, his vice president will be military, minister of interior will be military, minister of defense will be military, and then they will give health, trade and other, on kind of not threatened positions to civilians. Sorry.
How are they going to do that, Dr. Lamin? Do they have to resign from the military before they have these positions, or they can double it?
Well, like I said, in 20 few years back, they will still be in their uniforms. I mean, the same situation is happening in Sudan. So they will be in their military uniforms and then head these institutions, as soldiers. But what then they will do is that, bring in some, obviously legal-minded people, like, for example, the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General will be a civilian, and then they will help the military to quickly draft, their decree, because if you suspend the constitution, you have to have a law that will run the country. You can't just, there can't be lawlessness. So there has to be something. So now they will come up with their decree, which will obviously, be like a martial law. There is no right for you, it has to be dictated by what the military has said. Everything is suspended. So normally these things will be done in a haste, to the extent that, if you are an opposition leader and you said, well, I have the right, to my political right, under my international covenant of civil and political rights, that gave me the right to take part in politics. And the military said, we have suspended all political activities. You, as a political leader, opposition leader, you organize, a party rally during that period, you'll be arrested, either disappeared or sent to jail.
Yeah.
So this is
Dr. Lamin, Mr. Joseph wants to ask a question, but let me ask you, one more question so that Mr. Joseph can come next. It's good that we're talking about, you just mentioned the point of the military not being, shouldn't be affiliated with politics.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you've also been, like you said, an ex-soldier from the British Army. From the low rank up to the rank of colonel, it's a gradual process that you acquire while in the military.
Yeah.
Now, after the colonel, it's an appointment that you get, from the government. So,
yeah,
isn't that part of politics? And isn't that the reason why, especially what we've seen in Africa, most of the times it is not the generals who are leaders of these coups. It is often the colonels and
yes,
the low-level officers. Does that explain the reason why, there's politics at the very high top and at the lower top, it's more like, let's take over? I mean,
yeah. I think that's one of these. Obviously, that's one of the strategic, that the military will deploy, because they knew that, when you, for example, let's look at this. Most countries call them the CDS, which is the Chief of Defense Staff. So the Chief of Defense Staff is more likely that he will be appointed by the head of state, because every president wants stability and they want peace of mind. If I am the head of state, I don't want to appoint a chief of defense staff or the police commander who is not, who doesn't share my ideas and my party politics with, because that's the risk, isn't it? You won't sleep at night. Okay, it's just a human nature. So you want someone to be your defense staff who, you can work with. You can work with cordially, and you can, they will execute your orders as you want it. So now that's why when coups happen, you see that the top generals are sidelined, and then it's only the junior officers will take over, and then they will arrest all the top generals, because they knew that these top generals are very close to the president. So if we organize the coup, it's more likely that it wouldn't, and we get them involved, it's more likely that it wouldn't be successful, because those top generals, you could guarantee that they are completely
political.
They are with the president. Okay.
That's a good point, Mr. Joseph. I wanted to hear that from Dr. Lamin, because, as I said, he wears a lot of hats. The legal ones, the counterterrorism ones, and also the military hat. Mr. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. You see, Dr. Lamin mentioned the international community. Now, to me, it seems that the international laws are violated especially in Africa. And it looks like they really do not even respect what the international laws are.
Yeah.
So when you look, for example, I can't see a military coup taking place in Germany or in Britain, because they understand, even though the Constitution, the British Constitution is not really written similar to the ones that we have in Africa. So my question is that, why do the international community stand by and see those laws violated? Is there any way of enforcing those laws, saying, look, when it comes to military coups, if you have got a democratic elected government, don't even try to attempt that?
Yeah.
So do you think that the international community is able to enforce these laws in Africa, or they're just saying, well, look, this is their own affairs, let them figure that out?
Yeah. And I think that, that's a brilliant question. I think the problem that international community have is that they have to respect the sovereignty of a country. Every country has its own, a sovereignty. They're independent, and you will hear this a lot from dictators. Whenever international community is putting pressure on them for their human rights violations, they will say, "Do not interfere within the internal affairs of our country. We are an independent nation." Okay, so we get this all the time. So dictators in Africa will have this excuse where they're telling the international community, "Don't interfere within our internal politics. This got nothing to do with you." So that's number one. And they're thinking, okay, well, it's an internal issue. However, even if it is an internal issue, human rights violations are occurring. International law has been violated, because, for example, when, there is a sustained torture where, political, opposition or journalists have been tortured, under the Convention Against the Torture Act, CAT, prohibit torture. It's against international law. So, but as soon as the international community start talking about this, the government will say, "Do not interfere within the internal affairs of our country." So that's one aspect of it. Then the second one is that if, for example, what happened, the intervention in Libya, and David, you and I did, a lot of work on this, in terms of counterterrorism. You want to stop that kind of scenario where the international community, or even in Afghanistan and in Iran, in Iraq, where the international forces interfered, and then it turned into civil war, many years of civil war. It never ends. Okay, so these are a couple of problems that they have. So now that's why they're trying to say to the people, the military, when the military comes, and they say to them that, "Look, we want you to come up with a transitional program very quickly to restore the rule of law, to restore the constitutionality." But then the military are obviously reluctant, and then they will say, "Minimum, give us 3 years, because we got so much. There's lots of mess that we need to." But all they're doing is to perpetuate their grip on power, to stay in power as long as possible. And then there is a chance.
But Dr. Lamin, isn't it also true? Sorry to interrupt you there, but I think it's important for you to mention this. Isn't it also true that it is also because they didn't have a plan while carrying out the coup?
Yeah, obviously, mainly, what the military will do is the only plan they will have is, it will be a strategic military plan, how to go to the objective. So how are we going to go to the State House? That is the plan. How are we going to get in? And then usually when they get in, they can't even decide who the leader is going to be, who is going to be the spokesperson, who is going to actually talk to the people, because at this point you're taking a risk. From the day that you plan this coup, you're taking a massive risk. And there's a 50-50 chance, obviously, that it will be successful and it will not be successful. So they cannot talk to civilian political strategists and say to them, "Look, I am trying to organize a coup, so help me, to plan the cabinet, to plan, to have," they don't have time for that at this stage. At this stage, all they want is how they can topple the government, and then they can come up with a plan.
Okay, good. So, Dr. Lamin, so let me, because we haven't got much time, let me ask you 2 more questions, before we go. Now, one other question which has always come up when there is a coup in Africa, since from the 60s, is this idea that there is, there's a Western country behind the coup.
Yeah.
That some of the coup leaders were trained in America, some of them were trained in Russia. I mean, all countries will come up, during this period of time. We've seen the same that is happening in Mali. Now, if we are saying that the people that are trained in carrying out these coup d'etats, for example, are trained by the West, why isn't the West involved in coup d'etats themselves? Why is it that it's only the people that are trained from Africa that are involved, or is it just some kind of an excuse that we're using?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, that could be a propaganda, and also, I mean, people obviously say so many things when coups happen, and obviously until you speak to the coup leaders themselves. But I mean, a lot of African, officers are trained in Europe, in Russia, in America, so that's not new. Um, Unless you have a concrete evidence that actually this coup was sponsored by the West, it's really difficult. And I think also the military, whoever is in power, try to take those rumors at their advantage to tell the enemies that, look, we have people behind us, whether that is true or not, but it's a power for them as well. But yeah, I think it's an important question, but I think it's impossible to answer really, until you actually have evidence that these people have been trained, or have been sponsored to stage a coup.
Okay. Yeah. And one more question before we go. In your experience, and this is a key question because this is the topic of the day. What do you see more happening in Africa? Constitutional coups by politicians, or military coups by the military? Which ones are much more common, and which ones should we be worried about more?
I think we should be more about the constitutional coups where the president are elected by the people, and then during their time in the office, they're amending constitution to suit them. I think that is what we need to watch out, and I think that will lead on to lots of civil unrest, because if we elect you to stay for 5 years, or sorry, for stay for 10 years, and then you keep changing the constitution to suit you and to stay for more than 10 years, then people will go on the street, and that's when we have chaos.
Thank you, Dr. Lamin, for your time. Dr. Lamin Daffeh, a constitutional expert, anti-terrorism specialist, and also a former member of the British Army. I appreciate your expertise in this subject of constitutional and military coups in Africa. As Dr. Lamin has made it very clear, there are much more constitutional coups happening, and sometimes, if not most, these constitutional coups, by themselves, give birth to military coups, and I think it's important that the audience understands how these coups are being carried out, whether it's a constitutional coup or it's a military coup, and what really happens behind closed doors in terms of preparation, in terms of international or national connections, and this happens a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we always give you our security updates is for the audience to get a grasp as to what goes on in Africa, but more especially how some of these issues can be avoided, but also to get the people to be aware that power lies in the hands of the people. There is a social contract between the state and the people, and that social contract, goes both ways. While the people have to respect the constitution, the executive and the leaders of the state are also bound to respect, the opinion of the people. For justice is much more powerful than legal institutions. And, we hope that, this message today has been made very clear by a panelist, Dr. Lamin. Thank you very much, Dr. Lamin. And, we would have you again to talk about other subjects of competence. We want to appreciate Africans in London Television. We want to appreciate Mr. Joseph Otieno for his contributions and for hosting this episode of Africans in London Security Update. Mr. Joseph, thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies, gentlemen. And Our viewers, thank you very much. We have a very important question which has come in very late. It is from Alex Ackerman. But Alex, what I would suggest, because we have run out of time, what I would suggest is this. I will send this question to David, and of course then David will pass it on to Dr. Lamin. As I always say, the conversation continues on social media such as Facebook and YouTube. So the question will be addressed. And also I will probably ask kindly Dr. Lamin to write a simple blog for us to put it on Facebook so that we answer this question. Okay. Yeah, we are aware. But as I always say, when you have a question, please send it in earlier. Yeah. Or you can actually write down your question. That question will be read. David Otto will introduce the question, and we take it from there. But I believe Dr. Lamin will be back, because this is what we have just touched here. Believe me, we have just scratched the surface. We haven't even scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He mentioned people. He mentioned the presidents sitting on the presidential chair for 30 years. We know some of them, and that we know that he has mentioned the tricks that they play. But now we have also to respect time, because if we will overstay, that means we are not following our constitution. You see, we have got our own too. So, yeah. Gentlemen, yes, we have got our own constitution too. We have to follow it. So, gentlemen, until then, ciao. But every Thursday we have got programs such as this. Ciao.